Okay, so for video number 4, I've moved ahead quite a bit. I've blocked in a lot more of the gray tones around Buzz's head, and I feel confident now that I can start blocking in the base tones. So I actually use the blender and wet the entire face, not the eyes or the teeth, and I've already started to create this core shadow. And so I'm going to continue with that. Basically a blender, and 20% is what I've been using on his face. And I'll just show you, remember rendering a sphere, how do you do a circular or spherical object? Well, number one, the strokes tend to follow the direction of the object. So you see me use these circular strokes. Rather than doing diagonal strokes on the flat surface of, say, a cube, I'm kind of circling around and feathering out my tone that I just dropped in. That was a 20 and this is a blender. And I'm circling around the shape of that dimple in his cheek. And since this was drying a little bit, I'll re-wet this side of the face and go right through the chin. And you notice I'm pulling in the direction of that chin, which is a big sphere. We have multiple spheres that make up his face. And you can see it's really like I'm just doing a contour drawing of his entire face, even though I'm just wetting it down. And now I'm going to go back in with 20 again, and I'm going to keep doing this to deepen those tones. I'm not doing anything darker than 20 as far as adding tone. I won't add, say, 30 and 40 until I'm really confident that I've got the base tones of the face in. So this is the core shadow running down the side, the shadow side of his face. I know that I got to have a cast shadow coming off the nose. All the shadows have a soft edge. Therefore, I know that I have to feather everything. So I'm going to keep that blender constantly in my hand. And I'm going to keep softening edges where I need to. When I get to the point where I feel I need to add some sharpness, it's probably going to be near the end of my render when I have the base tones in. So here I'm going to start the soft shadow under the lower lip. And again, you notice these kind of circular light strokes circling around that lip. I can actually use an upward stroke to lift the marker and actually blend to nothing without actually using the blender. It's a nice little trick you can use, just varying pressure and lifting the marker. I'm going to go back into the core shadow on the chin. And again with a blender, so because this area here was getting a bit dry, so I'm going to re-wet. Again, following the contour of the chin. And you can sort of see how the face evolves. It's like a ghost image, which is fine. With something that's got a base tone of 10 to 15%, as the skin does here, I'm really not going to go very dark very fast. Going to take it slow. And here I'm actually bringing in, what did I use here? A 30, so one step darker. And right in here you can see I can start hitting this darkest part of the dimple of the cheek there. And I will tend to exaggerate values as we go. So I'm actually going to make the core shadow in here darker. And the reason is I noticed as I was rendering Buzz, he's, the pieces of his uniform, his suit, I felt they were a little bit too close together in value if I followed the reference too closely. So I'm punching it up in terms of darkening darks, pushing dark tones lighter, darker tones darker, and all of that is typically what I do in an illustration to give it more strength, more power. Right here. Again, readdressing the cast shadow on the nose. So you can see I'm globally working around the whole face, not staying in one place too long. This is a good technique. You don't get fixated on one area of the face or one area of an object. It keeps you from becoming too hyper-focused on one area and letting another neighboring area dry. So I'm constantly backing up visually and looking at the whole face and seeing, do I have the tones balanced? Am I getting too dark too fast in an area? If I do, I back off. Like right there, I'm just going to put a little bit of a kind of a frown tone there, and that actually works quite nice. He doesn't look angry, he just looks very focused, a little bit crazy, which his character is. I'm going to pull this tone up a little along the side of the nose, and I'm actually letting the marker dry as I do this. When you use it a lot and scrub it on the paper a little bit, it dries a bit, and that's another technique for blending a light tone into nothing. Now here's the blender again. You can hear that sound. That's me scrubbing a little bit with a fine tip. Just getting that last little bit of blend, softness going. And right about there, I'm pretty happy with what I see happening on the face. You can see my reflected light is too strong. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to bury that tone with, believe it or not, the 30. So at this point, I feel I can just go in and add that tone and let that bright line fade off. Now here's a nice trick. Little halo. Learned this lesson from Da Vinci and the Mona Lisa. Little halo off the edge of the face, edge of the hand, the arm, accentuates the depth behind the face. And so it actually gives you a feeling of atmosphere, not happening so much in the reference. It is happening a little bit in the CGI render. CGI doesn't specifically add atmosphere. You really have to accomplish that either by doing a beautiful job creating your tones. And you notice I got rid of that white. I find this white area here, right there, too distracting. Pulls my attention away. It's an edit. I'm actually going to let that fall back a bit. I think it works better as a piece. So yeah, I do make decisions, aesthetic decisions, editing decisions, breaking from my reference a little bit. I'm even going to experiment putting an even darker tone in there. Why not? Just to see. Might as well have a little fun with this and just see what I can do. So now I'm creating a darker mass behind in this area so that it doesn't pull forward and fight for attention with the face. I'm going to deepen this area more and firm up that line right there. This was actually a lip that's catching the light. This shape looks to me, that's a little confusing, but I believe it's actually this shape coming around. Just that side back of the helmet. And so you got to figure things out. Sometimes it's easy to get lost in your render. So I'm going to build a core shadow here and make it more dramatic. I'm also going to do the same thing on this sphere, which is the joint, the elbow joint. And you can see I'm really starting to push that tone darker. I'm going to let it come down and bury that reflected light a bit more. There is another material here which is clearly darker, so I'm going to just let that start to block in, come back, and hit that soft blend there. That's where the highlight appears. Soften that, soften this here too. And now I'm going to come back in with a little bit of white pencil. Put in a bit more rim lighting on the far side, which is reflected light. Going to do the same thing here. I actually bring back a little bit of the reflected light I lost and kind of control it. Put a spotlight here. And then I actually go back again with the marker. And counterbalance it. So it's really a push and pull. I'm actually going a little too far each time, a little too bright, a little too dark, a little too bright, a little too dark, to push contrast a bit more. I'm just fairly comfortable doing that because I know I can modify things as I go. Here I feel like I went too dark, too high, so I'm actually going to put a blend across there, and I like that. That just popped out that round shape, but there is this little element here, different material, just like this is. These little pieces look like they are an anchor that holds the different parts together. So I'm just going to block that in dark, and then I can actually very quickly put a highlight here on the far side and on the near side, and look at that, it looks like it's a little reflective dark piece of plastic. Same thing here, I'm going to deepen the shadow. And then take about a 30, using it as a blender, and just create a transition in there. So I want this to look like it goes back underneath. And then the same thing down here. I want to get a little bit more darkness. And I feather it out so I don't just fill that shape. I always want transitions going on as I render. And the idea is that push and pull to make all the parts look like they have roundness or dimension to them. I'm going to once again deepen the score shadow. Because I deepen these tones, I feel I can now get away with that. I can actually deepen this tone overall. Actually going back into the reflected light I created there, even in this area, deepening that a bit more. Now these two materials are getting a bit close together in value, so I'm going to put a little more separation back again. Maybe to just fade a little bit of pencil over that. And then take a 10. Actually, that's a blender. And just soften. So I can back off the contrast a little bit. You know, your last touch before I stop this video, you can actually go to your pen a little bit here. So I have just a fine tip pen, and I can actually stroke in just a little bit of a line. And look at that, I get that little definition on the edge. I wouldn't do it here, but I might actually put a little bit of an edge there. And just by adding that little bit of sharpness, I can actually bring things into focus. That's another way you bring the whole illustration into focus, is to put nice crisp edges where they belong. Not everywhere, because we don't want a cartoon, but just some key places to kind of make sure that, you know, you might say it's the illustration equivalent of getting your camera perfectly focused.